The day was like any other in the small town of Bentonville. The streets were lined with rows of parked cars, the sun shining brightly, and the air was filled with the soft hum of everyday life. At Bentonville Grocery, a local modest store that most people passed by without a second thought, a young grocery clerk named Sarah was finishing up her shift. It had been a long day, but Sarah loved her job. She wasn't one to dream of grand adventures or faraway places. Instead, she found contentment in the simplicity of helping people with their groceries and offering a friendly smile. Little did she know, that simple day was about to take a drastic turn that would change her life forever. As Sarah locked up her register and waved goodbye to a few regular customers, she noticed something strange out of the corner of her eye. A small, shiny limousine had just pulled up at the far end of the parking lot. The car wasn't familiar to the town, nor was it a usual sight at Bentonville Grocery. She glanced briefly at the tinted windows but thought nothing more of it. After all, it was just another car, another part of the world outside her little bubble. As she turned to head toward the back exit, a faint, frantic cry caught her attention. It was high-pitched and unmistakable, like the cry of a baby in distress. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and without hesitation, she rushed toward the sound. It didn't take long to find the source. A baby, no more than a few months old, was lying on the ground near one of the parked cars, its tiny body shaking with fear. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she knelt down beside the baby, her hands trembling slightly. "Hey there, little one," she whispered softly, trying to calm the baby as she cradled it in her arms. The child's face was streaked with tears, and its tiny fists were clenched in fear. Sarah's mind raced as she wondered how the baby had ended up alone in the parking lot. The baby's clothing was disheveled, and there were no signs of an adult nearby. Suddenly, her gaze darted back to the limousine. She wondered if the baby had somehow escaped from inside. But why was the car parked so far away? Who would leave a child alone like this? Her pulse quickened as she cradled the baby closer to her chest, her instincts kicking in. As she walked toward the store to seek help, Sarah's mind kept replaying the questions. Who would leave a baby behind? And why? At that moment, she heard the sound of a car door opening. She turned around sharply, her heart racing, and caught a glimpse of a man stepping out of the limousine. He was tall, well-dressed, with a stern expression on his face, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The man walked toward her, and for a brief moment their eyes met. There was something strange in his gaze, something cold and calculating. Sarah's breath hitched, and she instinctively took a step back, clutching the baby tighter in her arms. The man paused, his lips tightening into a thin line. "What are you doing with my daughter?" he asked, his voice low and calm, but Sarah could hear the edge of fear behind his words. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. His daughter? Her mind raced as she glanced down at the baby, then back at the man. There was no sign of a woman or any other family member around. Why had this man parked so far from the store and left the baby unattended? The questions were mounting, and Sarah's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and concern, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had to act fast. I found her in the parking lot," Sarah stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. She was crying and no one was around. She was alone. The man took a step closer, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sarah thought he might take the baby from her, but instead, he simply stared at her in silence. His eyes softened for the briefest moment, and Sarah caught a flicker of something, a trace of guilt, maybe. But just as quickly, his expression hardened again and he turned away. "Thank you for helping her," he said curtly before getting back into the limousine. But before the door could fully close, Sarah's instincts screamed at her to act. Was this man really the father? Why was he acting so strangely? With one last look at the baby in her arms, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't let the baby go with this man without knowing more. She stepped back, keeping the baby close to her chest, and without a word she turned and rushed toward the store. Behind her, the limousine started up, and as she glanced back one last time, she saw the man watching her from the rear window, his cold eyes locked on her every movement. Inside the grocery store, Sarah quickly found the manager, Mr. Thompson, and explained what had happened. He was shocked by the story, his face paling as he listened. Together, they called the authorities to report the incident. But something inside Sarah told her there was more to this story than met the eye. As they waited for the police to arrive, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the man from the limousine was not who he claimed to be. There was something about the way he had acted. Too calm, too detached. It didn't sit right with her. She found herself replaying the events over and over in her mind, trying to piece together the puzzle. Meanwhile, the police arrived and Sarah reluctantly handed the baby over to the officers, who immediately began asking her questions. But before they could get much information, a black-suited figure appeared in the doorway of the store. Another man, this one with a stern, authoritative look on his face. His arrival only deepened Sarah's suspicions. The man identified himself as a private investigator hired by a wealthy family in town. He quickly asked for the baby and assured the officers that the child was not in any danger. Sarah's heart sank as she watched the investigator take the baby in his arms and leave without saying another word. The tension in the room was palpable. As the door closed behind the investigator, Mr. Thompson turned to Sarah, his face full of concern. "Do you think something's wrong?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her mind spinning. "But I don't think it's over. There's something more to this." Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah received a call. The man from the limousine had been identified, not as a father, but as a highly influential businessman with a criminal record. The baby? She wasn't his at all. The truth was even more shocking. The child had been kidnapped, and the man was involved in a child trafficking ring. The police, following up on Sarah's tip, had uncovered the entire operation, and the baby was now safely with her real family. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had helped earlier was a criminal, a man who had used his wealth and status to conceal his dark secrets. But the moral of the story hit her hard. By following her instincts, Sarah had unknowingly become a hero. She had saved a child's life, and in doing so, had helped uncover an underground world of crime. As Sarah stood in front of the grocery store that evening, reflecting on the events of the day, she realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness and the simplest decisions could lead to life-changing consequences. She had made a choice to help a child in need, and that decision had saved a life. The truth had been revealed, and justice had prevailed, all because of one moment of courage.